and harassment in the second degree. However, jurors found him not guilty of assault in the third degree with intent to cause physical injury and of aggravated harassment in the second degree. To break down the differences in all of these charges, CBS News correspondent Jerika Duncan, an anchor at CBS News, was in the courtroom. She joins us right now. Jerika, joining us on the phone, how did the judge come to this decision? You've been following this case, or how did the jury come to this decision?
That's right. So, Lilia, just to set the scene, I'm standing outside of the Manhattan Criminal Court. We are waiting right now for Jonathan Majors to walk out of court at any time. But as you mentioned, just before 3 o'clock this afternoon, we heard the judge order the jurors to stand up, that a verdict had been reached. The foreman then gave what you just noted, the count 1 through 4. Jonathan Majors was facing assault and harassment charges that carry up to a year behind bars. He was found guilty on counts 2 and 4. That was for assault in the third degree or recklessly causing physical harm, and harassment in the second degree. As you know, this trial stems from the March 25th arrest of Majors for allegedly assaulting his ex-girlfriend, Grace Jabbari. Jabbari had claimed that night before, the two got into a physical altercation inside an SUV after she grabbed Major's phone because of a text she said she saw from another woman. It was at that time that Jabbari said she suffered an injury to her head and her right finger. So again, just to rehash, the jury deliberated for 3 days. There were 6 jurors that found Jonathan Majors, 34-year-old actor, guilty on 2 counts, facing up to a year in prison. He is scheduled to be back here at Manhattan Criminal Court for sentencing on February 6th. Again, we are waiting for him to walk out. So if I cut you off quickly, we're just trying to see if he has any comment. As of right now, he has not had much to say in terms of his reaction. In court, it was very stoic. I'm looking right now in front of an SUV that's pulling up, presumed to be for Jonathan Majors, and likely his now girlfriend, Megan Good, who's been by his side throughout this 2-week trial. But the family walked by, friends who were here in support of him that we saw on his side from the very beginning did not have any comment. They obviously did not look excited or happy about being found guilty or Majors being found guilty on 2 of those 4 counts. But that is the latest here. Jonathan Majors found guilty on 2 of those 4 counts involving harassment and assault.
And I mean, Jerika, Jonathan Majors has had, up until that March arrest, such a rising career. He's been on Creed 3, Ant-Man. He's an important Avengers figure in the Marvel universe, somebody who had a whole movie around him. He's had, Lovecraft Country. He's had so many big successes in Hollywood over the last several years, and really was seen as one of those rising stars, like really rising to that A-level stardom if he wasn't there already. What has this case meant, and how are people feeling about it? I'm seeing comments on social media where people say, they still doubt that he was guilty despite, the videos and the evidence that have emerged, and despite this conviction. How is this all being received so far throughout the trial that you've covered?
This was definitely a divisive situation when you think about people who do support him. There were folks here that we spoke to off camera from his fan club who've been posting about this trial. And then you have people who were here on behalf of Grace Jabbari, her family, her friends, who were tearing up during some of her testimony for 4 days about what she said happened during the relationship with Jonathan Majors. So I think at a time where, as you've covered stories too involving women who are sometimes not often heard or believed, I think you have definitely seen a shift culturally when a woman says that these things happen, taking it more seriously. I think some have questioned when you talk about other people commenting on his innocence or his guilt, how rare it is to have a misdemeanor charge and misdemeanor charges that are brought before the Manhattan Criminal Court in this way. But obviously you're talking about a celebrity, as you mentioned, who did have an incredible movie career in this last year with Marvel movies and Creed and Devotion. We actually got a chance to speak to him about a year ago about that movie, Devotion. So he was someone who was on the rise. And I think in watching him and seeing just sort of how he responded or reacted in court, seeing how his defense attorney broke down at her closing argument, it is clear that this person, Jonathan Majors, is fighting for his reputation more than anything.
Absolutely. I mean, after a time where you have seen just the impact of the strikes on Hollywood, I wonder what this process also has done to the development of those extremely high-grossing and expensive movies to make. Is there any indication of whether or not he will return to, or if these Marvel films will be released with him in them, or if they've already been filmed? What's the status of those future projects for him? Do you know?
As far as we know, a lot of things were put on hold because of this trial dangling over him for the last 9 months. So as to what his future holds, we don't really know. I think right now, as I stated, we're still waiting for him to come out at any moment. It becomes, what does he have to say, and if there are any civil actions that are taken after this, knowing that, Grace Jabbari, in at least 2 of these counts, the jury did believe her and not him.
And Jericka, can you talk to us a little bit about what evidence was presented? What do you suppose was that whatever secured this conviction, at least on these 2 assault and harassment charges?
So the harassment in second degree had to do with the charge of what we saw outside of the car. One of the things that's important to understand and note in this case is while a lot of these SUVs and cars have cameras in them, that incident that Grace Jabbari said happened in that car was never captured on camera. So we were really relying on what Grace Jabbari said. Jonathan Majors, who did not take the stand, but obviously his defense attorney representing him had to say happened, and the driver who was in the car with him, but noted that he kept his focus on the road. He talked about hearing the woman getting upset, and it sounded like she was mad about something. But there was never any clear picture, literally and figuratively, of what happened inside the car, which is why that 4th count, and I have to double check myself, but I believe that has to do with what we saw outside of the car when it came to shoving Grace Jabbari into the SUV. As far as that 2nd count, when it comes to recklessly causing physical harm, that is this idea that someone could have caused harm, but they did not do it with intent. This is where we need a Ricky Kleeman to come in and really break down what all of the legal stuff means. But as far as I understood it, and I believe these jurors understood it, which is why you had this sort of conflicting 2 counts guilty, 2 counts not guilty when it comes to this particular case. Again, there was no video of the alleged incident. There were comments from both sides. There were comments from the driver. And then, of course, there was a history that they introduced of things that had happened in that relationship that could give one pause about whether or not Grace Jabbari was making this up or whether or not she was telling the truth. And in this case, it appears that the jurors found that she was telling the truth.
Well, to break down all of the legal terminology, the consequences, the repercussion, and perhaps what may have weighed heavily on the conviction, we have CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson joining us now from Los Angeles. Jessica and entertainment attorney Dante Mills as well. Oh, sorry, I just have Jessica. Apologies. Jessica, talk to us about what comes next. What comes next for Jonathan Majors? Do we have an idea of what kind of sentencing might follow these 2, the conviction on these 2 charges?
Up to a year. So what comes next is sentencing. There, of course, could always be appeals in this case. But typically speaking, what comes next is that a judge will look at the verdict, will look at aggravating factors and mitigating factors, and give out a sentence. Again, we're looking at, I believe, up to a year in jail.
Wow.
Of course, important for people to know that most of these cases never go to trial. It's very difficult to prove this type of case. We're now seeing, honestly, a bit of a split verdict. As Jericka mentioned, we have this division between recklessness, which the jury found, and intent, which the jury did not find. And most of these cases plead out. But Majors went to trial, I think, because he really wanted to salvage his reputation. This mixed verdict doesn't help him salvage his reputation.
Do you think so? I mean, it sounds like when I hear intent and recklessness, what I think is, okay, it seems like he didn't intend to, but, it seems like a lower conviction. Do you think that people who are supportive of Jonathan Majors, people who are saying, we don't believe that he did this or that he intended to do this, that it might have been, they will construe it as it being accidental? How do you legally and also how do you suppose that people will interpret what he was acquitted of versus what he was convicted of?
That's a great question. And one of the things, obviously, we talk about in the law a lot is your mindset. And when it comes to criminal law, the different laws apply depending on whether you have intent or recklessness or negligence. You use the word accident, and the jury found more than that. Mm-hmm. Recklessness is beyond an accident, which is really negligence. Negligence is, come on, you should have known better. There were red flags. You should have avoided the actions that you took. Recklessness involves a type of conscious disregard, and it's right in between intent and negligence. So, but to your question, for those who support Majors, will they view this? Is there something here to view this as a win? Of course, absolutely. But it's not a complete victory for him. He still did. He still is subject to 2 guilty verdicts. Again, in my mind, it's really split between the jury saying we don't see intentional assault, we don't see aggravated harassment, but we do see those lesser charges here. We think that he did something criminal that he shouldn't have done.
And then in terms of the harassment charge, I mean, we think of harassment as something perhaps that is not physical. How should we interpret the charge and the conviction on the harassment part?
So harassment in this case can be a much shorter period of time. And I think Jerika laid this out really clearly in terms of, we're really talking about the actions that took place where we could see them outside of the SUV. And this is a case that would have been, frankly, I think quite different if there had been a video recording. That would have been the best evidence for either side. So harassment, legally speaking, it doesn't mean that I call you 10 times every day on the phone. The harassment can include these really short time snapshots where you engage in a type of physical threat, again, or harassment that you shouldn't.
I'm sure that a lot of the people, or I've seen a lot of the discussions as this case has progressed, talking about self-defense, that she's the one who started it. This is what his attorney had said, that she's the one who went into a rage when she saw some text messages from a woman in his phone. If she had started the altercation, where does that take him in terms of, I mean, would you still be able to, if it was self-defense, and this is just going by the comments on social media and that sort of thing, would it still lead to these convictions?
The jury didn't find self-defense here. So I think that's what we should take away. Now, I do want to emphasize that I think self-defense in the way you and I might talk about it is slightly different from self-defense when it comes to a penal code. And so in this case, yes, could it change the legal calculus if the jury believes that she started this? That's true. But what I take from the jury verdict is that they still think that he engaged in actions that he shouldn't have, even if he was not the instigator. Yeah. So when it comes to self-defense, we're really talking about using a proportionate amount of, or taking a proportional response to a certain situation. And he could have, if she really was the instigator, simply just left and walked away. And the law, and I'm not talking about the specifics of this code, but the law in general prefers that if you can leave, you do leave, as opposed to then responding with physical force.
Of course. Question, in terms of the evidence that we've been seeing, just because there's all this video evidence, there's these surveillance videos, there is a moment where it seems like she's following him, but then there's a moment that I think this case comes down to that has been discussed so much, and it's him shoving her into the car. What do you think, or what stands out to you with your experience as what led to this conviction?
I think exactly that. I think you're exactly right to zero in on that moment where you can see his strength. You can see him trying to push her back into the SUV. But I also think that the jury was not unaware of the fact that she, in the end, is chasing him. And there were, as happens in virtually, well, in so many cases, there are facts on both sides, right? This wasn't a slam dunk for either side. And his attorneys certainly had something to argue here, that she was the one who was running after him, that he was the one who sustained more injuries, that he was the one who left and felt threatened. And then the prosecution, of course, had plenty to argue as well. And we see that in these two convictions. So I think her testimony obviously was key to getting convictions. I think that moment where you see him trying to get her back into the SUV was key. But I think it was key both ways, right? I think it was key to getting the lesser convictions. And I think it was key for the jury saying, but not more.
Interesting. So what's next in this case? I understand that he's back for sentencing in early February. What will happen between now and then, and what kind of, and I know you kind of briefly touched on it, but what kind of sentencing do you suspect comes with this?
So, yeah, it's a great question. I mean, what's next is that the prosecution and the defense will typically submit sentencing memoranda, and the prosecution will obviously say something like 1 year's maximum. In this case, we suggest, and then they'll pick a number and they'll explain why. And the defense will say no jail time is appropriate in this case, and they will explain why they think that there are plenty of mitigating factors here, and why there are other punishments that they think would be appropriate, as opposed to, I mean, the defense is always going to say, do not put my client in jail. And I think that's really the argument that we'll see. And we'll see, my guess is the judge handing down something in the single digit months. And again, it's a guess. So it is, as always, you've heard me say this before, the judge has discretion here.
Right. Jessica Levinson, thank you so much. Jerika Duncan, thank you.
Thank you.
We are going to take a short break, but we'll have much more live coverage of the verdict at the top of the hour. You're streaming CBS News.
Original documentary from CBS reports tensions rising between a powerful country and a vital island.
The supply of this technology came grinding to a halt. The world would grind to a halt.
Absolutely.
As Taiwan faces threats and